To all of you who I would imagine have raced straight from work to join us this evening, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. My name is Graham Richards. I have the great honor of being the MC to guide us through proceedings this evening, and being surrounded by so many honorable members of this incredible, I'm going to call it a movement. The moment is not lost on me. Now, you might think before a show like this, you would get nervous speaking to politicians this close to the 29th and housing this kind of discussion. You might think I would be nervous standing in front of a crowd like this that carries so much gravitas that I would be nervous, and I am. I'm terrified right now. I know I don't look it. That's probably about 80% the suit. I am terrified not because I fear what you will think of me or that tonight won't be a massive success. I am nervous because I know how much this matters. In fact, I know too much. I know what is at stake right now. I understand in any one of the lenses that we look through tonight, we have reached the tipping point, the crunch moment, and the world is looking to us right now. It might be embodied within the big cat story, where that now rests on our shoulders to save the big cats in the world right now. We have that responsibility within us. But it's the broader conversation around the social development arc. In my world, I have been the tip of the commercial, consumer-driven spear to make probably about 400 million rands worth of commercials land in the purpose-driven space. And you would be amazed. I would come in at number 99 and provide 99% of the authenticity, the passion, the emotion, the feeling to make some of the biggest campaigns this country has ever seen land. But tonight, I come in here, I don't even have to be that 1%. I just have to sit and watch what unfolds, because 100% of the audience here is on the same page. So right now, I want you to turn to the person closest to you. Okay, it might be a bit awkward, I'm sorry, but tell them they look amazing, because everyone does look amazing. Maybe introduce yourself first, okay? And especially if you are here with your partner. And that is what I want to continue for the rest of this evening. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you would be amazed at how seldom the choir gets together, how seldom we have an opportunity to connect to this unbelievable network. It is a strategic network that matters now more than ever before. Maybe COVID, and I'm sorry to use the C word, okay, but maybe it reversed things. It inverted what passion and purpose mean within the broader spectrum. Those of you that have lived selflessly like the Fionas of this world for the last 2 decades, building trust within the communities that matter the most, building that traction on a political space, and I love the fact that we have got so many political entities represented here, even this close to the 29th, having to set aside party politics to just be a South African who cares about the future of our children, bottom line. And I'll tell you something, in all of the human-driven welfare organizations that I've worked with, the funny thing is, an algorithm started to emerge. I would know exactly how a community was, where their socioeconomic mindset was, that social development arc. I could tell that within a second, looking at the state of the animals in their care or being completely ignored. There is something about the connection between social development, the purpose-driven groundswell that we are experiencing right now, and the opportunities within animal welfare to speak to one welfare, all welfare. Why? Because the people will only be okay if the animals are okay. Communities will only be okay if the ecosystem around them is okay. And I can speak with 100% certainty because I wake up with about 1.5 million South Africans every single day. I don't have to wait for that perception to filter down for me. I get it from the guy who has just lost his son. I get it from the mother who has just lost her daughter. I get it firsthand and I understand, which makes me almost tearful to see a room like this come together tonight. And I have to warn you, I am a cry risk, as Fiona knows, so I probably will shed a tear or two as we progress this evening, and with good reason, because we have an incredible panel of people to discuss various angles when it comes to animal welfare right now. So I'm going to start with one of the first honorable members joining us this evening. And I love the fact that every single person here has earned their stripes, has earned the right to be here, and that certainly speaks to the first guest that we're going to welcome up onto the stage. He has a passion to make a difference and root out corruption. Okay, there's a little bit of the 29th coming in here, but we'll be okay. We have the Honorable Mr. Narendra Singh joining us this evening. He's passionate about multi-party democracy, constitutionalism, the rule of law, universal human rights, environmentalism, and animal welfare. And he had to put each one of those on his bio, otherwise we weren't going to invite him this evening. I cannot wait to hear what he has to say in a very golden opportunity to have his voice heard. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Narendra Singh.
Thank you very much, Graham. Somebody who says he's nervous, talking to 1.5 million people every day, Dave, and he's nervous. How do you think we feel? Talking to 400 people and you don't know where the next bottle of water is going to come on your head, or whether a helmet is going to crash onto your head. We are the ones who should be nervous. But thank you very much, Graham, for the introduction. I greet my colleague, Honorable Dave Bryant, Honorable Travers, Alderman J.P. Smith, Advocate Anthony Mitchell, and all the animal lovers that are here. And as Graham said, we are here for common purpose. I greet my daughter, Kajal. So good to see you after such a long time. We go back a long, 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 long way. And she'll probably tell you how long. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting me this evening to deliver the opening address. And I think it's a great opportunity, not only for us or for me to share some thoughts with you on animal welfare, but also to hear all of you that are going to be making presentations later on, Fiona. And I decided not to take the last flight out to Durban because I've got a commitment tomorrow morning, but join my colleague, Honorable Travers, on the 6 o'clock flight to Durban. So I think they'll carry us out of the room, into the plane, and off we go. So where do we start? I've had a long relationship with Fiona, with Michelle, and others, going back 10, 12 years when we started the first march. And you know, when I saw the march going down here, I thought you had organized it. Because I remember a huge march. We marched to Parliament and we marched in Durban. It was against cane lion hunting and other animal welfare issues. But I just wish more South Africans would march more often for animal welfare than for equal education and all the other socioeconomic things that we need. So I think it's imperative that we all get together in common purpose and spread the word and spread the gospel that, you know, animals are not just dumb. I was so impressed when I read in the paper this morning or yesterday morning in one of your papers, Honorable Smith, about the dogs that are being used in this horrific disaster in George. And it's only the dogs that are able to sniff out, you know, if there's somebody still alive there. And we call them dumb, yet we use them to the extent that we do. And one of the handlers there said, there was a time when there was a disaster and almost everybody was dead when this building had collapsed. And the dogs became despondent. And they decided to put one of their men that work with them into the rubble so that the dogs could go and find him alive. And then the dogs began, you know, actually feeling good for themselves. So it's so great that we have an opportunity in Parliament, Dave and I especially, because we serve on the Portfolio Committee on Environment, to be able to take up issues that relate to animal welfare. And, you know, we've been talking about the colloquiums, we've been talking about the issues with Barbara Creasy. And I must say, and tonight is not a night for politics, but Barbara Creasy has been one of those environmental ministers that has been more willing to listen to us than anybody else. And I think the latest move on the captive lion breeding issue, and she's prepared to bell the cat, if I'm the proverbial cat. And we didn't have that with others. Although Edna Molewa, when she was the Minister of Environmental Affairs, I remember you had 500,000 signatures, 500,000 signatures. And you wanted Prince Buthelezi to take those signatures to Edna Molewa because he had a relationship with them that, he could convince them to do certain things. And he was not available, and I came along, and Advocate Mitchell and I collected those signatures from you. And I remember we delivered boxes and boxes of petitions to Minister Edna Molewa. Then the colloquium came up and lots of other things. So I think sometimes those of you that may think that we are in Parliament, Dave and I and others, that we do not take up issues related to the environment and animal welfare, we certainly do. The canned lion hunting has been something on our radar for a number of years. I think although there are some new developments there, and we appreciate the report that was tabled recently in Parliament that we all spoke positively about, there's still a lot of work to be done. Because there are still many, many, many unscrupulous people out in our society who just look at how much money they can make out of this trade. Killing the lions, the bones, and all these trade, and we really need to continue doing something about it. I think my passion for the environment stems from the fact that I was MEC for Environment for 8 years in KwaZulu-Natal and worked with great people like Dr. Ian Player, Nick Steele, Andrew Ewing, and others. Not the Andrew Ewing of Dallas, but we had Andrew Ewing there. Worked with people like them who really were passionate. And I remember Dr. Ian Player and Prince Buthelezi were great friends. And, they together worked on issues of the black rhino and everything else. Prince Buthelezi was one of the first African leaders in the country to set up what was called the KwaZulu Nature Conservation Services under Nick Steele when he was Chief Minister in KwaZulu. So there has been that passion all these years, and I think I was just drawn into it. And it was great working with people like Dr. Ian Player, because Dr. Ian Player was a reasonable person to an extent. I remember we were talking about building a new camp in the Drakensberg. And it was a camp that would have fallen under my responsibility with the residential accommodation there. And he said, I want no TVs, I want no lights, I want nothing. This must be purely, in the bush, and we need to have this camp without that. And we spoke to him, because nowadays you get tourists coming from around the world, they want to have a hot bath or something like that at the end of the day. And we managed to convince him that we needed to do a few things that would, be a bit luxurious. In Parliament, I think Dave and I, and you would know that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of legislation. There's still this contestation between animal welfare, saddled between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environmental Affairs. And Dave can tell you that we are still waiting a year and a half later, Dave, or maybe more, 2 years, longer than that, for 2.5 years, for the Committee on Agriculture to sit with us so that we can come together on some of the issues that affect animal welfare. So I think when we go back to Parliament, hopefully we go back, some of us, we will continue this fight on your behalf. You are so wonderful that you can do this kind of work so passionately and so lovingly. And without people like you and organizations like you, it will really be a terrible world. And as Graham said, it's our children and our grandchildren that will inherit this earth, inherit everything that's here, and we've got to leave back for them something that they can be proud of. I was looking at a picture this morning that Anthony sent me. It was my grandson, who was 3 years old, holding a board, ban canned lion hunting. We were in Durban, we were marching, and I took my grandson along, and he was holding that board there. I sent it to him, and he called me and says, Nana, but that was a long time ago, don't show that picture to anybody. I said, well, we were all there sometime. But, I think it instills in them this kind of passion for animal welfare. And the other day we were in Parliament. We had a little colloquium with many. Fiona was there as well, and Swati was there. And remember Swati talking about the pangolins, and how pangolins are being decimated, you know. And she said one of the ways they are is through electric fences. And she says as they come to the electric fence and they crouch, they die. And she says the simplest thing to do is to lift your fence maybe 6 inches above the ground higher so they can sneak under. Now these are little things I think which will be our responsibility as animal lovers to bring to the attention of government so that there are regulations in place that we could deal with. I was also very pleased at some stage in my career there to take the portfolio committee along to watch bloodlines. And it was late, he was a minister, became a minister, Jackson Mthembu. And we went to the Labia Theatres to see bloodlines. And recently, we convinced Barbara Creasy to go to the aquarium to look at Nick Forster's movie. And, he won an international award for that documentary. So I think with the kind of pressure that we have been putting in as opposition, if we could get some of these things done, who knows what may happen when we ruling the country as a multi-party charter. So I leave that with you. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and I look forward to all the addresses this evening. Thank you.
It's amazing how as soon as the plates and the glasses started smashing, Mr. Singh knew it was his kind of party and he was going to stick around. I will tell you dodged a bullet there, because if I'd known you weren't getting onto a plane right now, I probably would have still been talking when we had started this whole shindig. But it's amazing that you raise every one of the points that you have, because they have informed my journey. And I can remember meeting with a critical member of a critical team informing Minister Creasy's next big move in the big cat space. And we were meeting literally the day before New Year's Eve, so he could meet with her on New Year's Eve to deliver her findings on New Year's Day. There is no quit. There is no stepping back anymore. I met Fiona, obviously journeying through their PAWS journey, and I hosted the screening of the Tiger Mafia. Has anyone watched the Tiger Mafia? You can't go back after watching something like that when you understand the extent of our role in what's going on within that space. And I know it echoes similar sort of movements in other areas of wildlife and domestic animals and farming. But during that podcast, which I think cemented our relationship, we got to a point where I couldn't move forward. I couldn't, within my own mind, think of what I was going to go home and say to my son about my role, my generation's role in the decimation of the totem of the wild in a country that sells ourselves based on the marketing principle of the Big Five. We are the world's biggest supplier, bar none, of animal parts to a market that didn't even know they existed before then. The lion has not been a part of that conversation until we created that demand, which means it's our responsibility to act on it. Now, of course, coming from TV land, I understand that we need the right kind of influencers. And this is where influence isn't a dirty word. Influencers living their purpose. Again, if there are some like bona fide influencers with millions of followers, I'm sorry, okay? I understand the power of your role right now. But I love the fact that we are all now becoming one movement, and we need the right kind of figureheads, the right kind of connections, the right kind of representation to let this land, not by political or cultural standpoint, but by passion, feeling, and emotion. And of course, she is an incredible actress, so she could probably deliver the performance and give us that emotion. But when you meet her and speak to her and get a sense of how passionate she is about this space, you understand that it is 100% authenticity. So yes, she is not actually the daughter of Mr. Singh. Well, I don't know that for sure, so maybe I must just double check. But she is in fact one of Durban's, I would imagine, proudest exports, and she's chosen to stay there because she is amazing and doing incredible things on film. But first and foremost, she is a rescue dog guardian. I'm talking, of course, of the incredible and beautiful Kajal Bhagwandeen. She has become the official first ambassador for PAWS South Africa, who speak to an international funding pool, like-minded, driven, purpose-driven people across the globe. She is the perfect person to represent this movement, the notion of one welfare as it speaks to animal welfare, and she is very graciously offered to be here tonight. So thank you so much. Please welcome Kajal onto the stage.
In film, we'd call this my apple box. So at least now you can see me. Thank you, Graham. Good evening, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to say a few words this evening as a proud South African PAWS ambassador. Tonight is a one-of-a-kind event where we join hands and hearts as South Africans who care for our fellow human beings, our animals, and our land, the land we also collectively live off. At PAWS, we talk and we walk our Live Kinder campaign. As we live kinder for South Africa and collectively for the health and welfare of people, animals, and the planet, one would ask, how do I live kinder? And how will the little change I make a difference? There's a quote that states, "But what can I do? I am just one person," said 8 billion people. Every little action has a huge impact, and together we do have the power to protect animals, humans, and the planets by making kinder choices. What are those choices? Let's start by making small changes for ourselves, our families, our households, and within our communities. Here are some examples of how we can all live kinder. Choose to visit real wildlife sanctuaries and choose not to support any kind of captive animal interaction facilities. Spay our pets. Let's choose to adopt our pets. Invest in slow fashion. Use sustainable natural fabrics. Mend old clothes and rewear them. There really is nothing wrong with that. Grow your own veg and teach our children how to do the same. Read labels. Empower ourselves. Choose local and seasonal goods and produce. Support regenerative farming. Empower our children by teaching them where their food comes from. Choose local, ethically raised animals, and let's go back to eating nose to tail and showing gratitude for what the earth has so graciously provided. I believe it also begins in our hearts and minds and includes a collective consciousness and awareness of the tone of the world right now, and empathy for our fellow humans being oppressed and animals suffering the world over, like in Sudan, the DRC, and Gaza. The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world." PAWS has several campaigns running that focus on the key areas they work in: Live Kinder, wild animals, companion animals, rapid response and disaster relief for animals, climate and animal welfare, farm animals, and their sanctuary Lions Rock, which many captive big cats in dire situations have finally found their forever homes. Most recently, 11 lions rescued from war-torn Sudan, and the latest pair, Vasilina and Nikola, who were found roaming the streets of Ukraine and Montenegro, respectively. I recently spent time with 3 beautiful dogs who were rescued from the dog and cat meat trade in Cambodia. 61 dogs were crammed into 6 cages. They were intercepted and subsequently rescued. Most were rehabilitated and rehomed in their surrounding areas and country, some to other countries, and 5 were brought here to beautiful South Africa. PAWS is working closely with Tears Animal Rescue, who's doing a really wonderful job to have them resettled and homed. We know their time will come and they will find their forever homes. If it's you or somebody you know, please do give them a visit at Tears. I'm a huge advocate for animal rescue and companion animals. Many people believe that if they want a specific breed, they have to go and buy it from a breeder. But that's not actually the case. There are many, many organizations, rescue organizations out there for specific breeds. And if you do pay a visit to any shelter, you will surely find specific breeds or a breed that you like. Now, I know adopting an adult dog doesn't sound as exciting as adopting a puppy. But a puppy requires far more work and time. Regardless, we have to allow them time to decompress and accustom themselves to their new surroundings and new family. Many have been to many homes, they've been abandoned, and most of the time we don't know what their past has been like. Just as it would take us humans time to adjust, we also need to give them time to adjust and settle. All they really need is a chance. Of all the campaigns that are close to my heart this year, I am most thrilled that the wheels to end captive lion breeding are turning. Although the road ahead is long, this is a very big win for us all. And I would like to end by sharing a very simple motto that I live by. When you know better, you do better. So if I, together with PAWS, can influence even a small group of human beings to make a positive change in their minds, a positive change to their lives, and in their communities, a ripple effect is sure to take place and be felt. So let's work together for better animal welfare worldwide. Thank you.
Now, I feel like I'm insulting Kajal if I move the podium away. If anyone else would like the apple box, feel free. I absolutely love this idea of connecting the dots. And to speak to what you've just said about just getting a little group of people to buy into what we're doing here. Believe it or not, to affect change, and certainly here in South Africa, and we don't always see it for the right results, to affect change, all we need is just under 4%. I think it's around 3.75%. That's what we need from buying. We don't need 50%, 60%, the majority. Doesn't mean we're all sheep, doesn't mean we're all disconnected, apathetic, I don't know. The bottom line is those that have the chutzpah, the fortitude, the bravery to stand up and push and influence and represent, live what they are trying to propagate, you will drag the rest of us along with you. When it comes to the next guest, she doesn't need that 3.75%, she needs nothing. She will drag us regardless. And that is what she has been doing for the last 20 plus years. Getting into her backstory was probably why I get so emotional about working within the space and the opportunities, the stakes, what it actually means, but she lives this movement. She has done more work than anyone I have encountered in my 25 years of purpose-driven work to affect real change. She has helped me get over my own baggage, to understand that there are normal farming practices that are far worse than the worst wildlife practices. Let it go, look for the connections, make those connections, and make it actually happen. She is a wonderful human being, and probably the reason why I'm going to cry tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the driving force, one of the major driving forces behind PAWS South Africa, Fiona Miles.
Sure. Thank you. Is this working? Thank you, yes. Behind that, a huge and incredible and passionate team. I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for being here. Honourable Singh, Honourable Alderman J.P. Smith, Honourable Members of Parliament, the Austrian Honorary Council, guests, those joining us online, colleagues and media. Thank you for joining us this evening and for the opportunity to speak with you and share with you in this forum today on topics very close to my heart and those that PAWS has been dedicated to for at least 3 decades. By way of introduction, PAWS is a global animal welfare organization serving wild, farm, and companion animals. We are dedicated to reveal suffering, rescue animals in need, and protect them. Our vision is a world where humans treat animals with respect, empathy, and understanding. We were founded in 1988 in Vienna, Austria, and we've been grown to be a global voice for animals with offices in 16 countries and operating 13 sanctuaries for big cats and bears. I started working for PAWS in 2006, being given an opportunity to lead the establishment of the organization in the country and establish our first big cat sanctuary, Lions Rock, together with a local and international team. At the time, I had recently seen the Cook report that had revealed for the first time the brutal killing of a lioness, trapped on one side of a fence whilst her young watched from the other side. Having recently become a mother myself, this struck a very deep chord within me, and since then, myself, our team, and so many others have worked to shed light on the dark corners of an industry that was growing without consideration for the welfare of the animals from which they were profiting, the consequences on our natural environment, or the people who had to work in awful conditions. These beginnings remind me of the following quote by Maya Angelou. "A caged bird has no freedom to stand up, lie down, turn around, groom themselves, and stretch their limbs. It sings of this freedom. Its tune is heard on the distant hills, for the caged bird sings of freedom." Between birth and slaughter, many caged animals never see daylight. Their small, dirty cages leave them hardly any room to move or engage in natural behavior. At PAWS, we believe that life in a cage is no life at all. Scared, abused, and stressed animals in cages are subjected to short and extremely miserable lives. Tonight, we will discuss and highlight the state of animal welfare for wild, companion, and farm animals in South Africa, and why it is imperative for animals to become stakeholders on the political agenda. Within policy making, there is an idea that this is not a serious topic. This is not an manner. There is a public demand for more action and policy. We should not be afraid of making this a political issue. When we show our children pictures and films about wild animals, we assume that this is how it looks for those animals and that the wild will always be the wild. South Africa is intensively farming and commercially trading but also exotic species like tigers and jaguars. Big cats are being traded both legally and illegally, fueling an international market for traditional Asian medicine products and so-called luxury items. This contributes to the decline of the species in the wild and a worldwide biodiversity crisis. As long as there is trade, every big cat has a price on their head. Big cat farming is a sad reality in South Africa, a lifetime of exploitation. In addition to the cruelty and exploitation suffered by lions and other big cats through trophy hunting and the bone trade, serious welfare concerns persist around the conditions that the cats are kept in. The bone trade means a profit can be made from the animals regardless of their health, so there is no incentive to keep the animals in high standards of welfare. The facilities in which big cats are kept in are largely unregulated and provide inappropriate conditions, such as enclosures that are too small, provision of poor nutrition, and lack of medical care, resulting in unnatural behaviors and the spread of zoonotic disease, distress, and physical deformities. 2024 marks 3 years since the South African government announced its intention to ban the captive lion industry, including captive breeding of lions, the keeping of lions in captivity, and the commercial use of lions and their derivatives. The announcement signified a first step to end an industry that has been out of control for decades and has caused the suffering of captive lions across the country. The Department for Environment's policy position on the conservation and sustainable use of a number of South African species, including lion, which proposes to end the captive keeping of lions for commercial purposes, and the closure of captive lion facilities, as well as the Ministerial Task Team's report, are two documents, both with strong statements and strong positive intention towards the closure of an industry that threatens not only the conservation of our wild species, but our reputation as global leaders in conservation. As for PAWS, we are standing ready to support the government's implementation of these recommendations with time-bound deadlines, and we urge the South African Department for Forestry, Fishery and the Environment to firstly publish a government implementation plan, including time-bound specific goals to follow up on the cabinet-approved position to end the captive keeping of lions for commercial purposes and close lion facilities, and to include all big cat species in the implementation plan. Due to a global convergence in the legal and illegal trade of big cats and their parts, the rationale for closing the industry applies to all big cats. The situation for around 10 to 12,000 lions and an unknown number of tigers and other big cats is just indicative of the state of welfare for wild animals in South Africa. When we move closer to our homes, we bear witness to cruelty to companion animals in our own communities. According to the State of Homelessness Index, 4 out of 18.6 million, or 22% of cats and dogs in South Africa are homeless, with 3.4 million living on the streets, while 750,000 are in shelters. Within South Africa's resource-poor communities, with little or no funding allocated to companion animal welfare, excuse me, pet owners struggle to access veterinary care, including vaccinations and sterilization for their pet companions. The state of companion animal welfare in both urban and rural South Africa calls for national, provincial, and local government to improve the health and welfare of owned and stray animal populations by providing veterinary services, sterilization, vaccination, and education on responsible pet ownership. As for PAWS, we envision a rabies-free South Africa with sustainable partnerships between animal welfare organizations, governments, veterinary groups, and funders. We can ensure sustainable funding for ongoing vaccination, spay and neuter, and public awareness programs, such as our responsible pet ownership program. A nationwide rabies campaign is one proposed solution to manage stray animal populations, particularly in areas with large populations. Combining several strategies such as public awareness through education, collaboration with relevant authorities, community involvement, and sustainable funding, we can achieve a rabies-free South Africa. In our farms, animals continue to endure a cruel reality far beyond our imagination. Caged farming systems dominate the animal agricultural industry. Factory farms prioritize production and profit at the expense of animal welfare, public health, and the environment. The harmful effects of factory farms on animals, humans, and our planet far outweigh the economic advantages. South Africa's National Response Climate Change White Paper has acknowledged that conventional, commercial, input-intensive agriculture has a range of negative environmental, social, and economic externalities, which increasingly render it as an unsustainable model. We need to review South Africa's approach to husbandry systems and practices, such as caged confinement, routine mutilations, young calves removed from their mothers, and the routine culling of millions of newborn male chicks. The imagery of happy animals sunning themselves in grassy fields is not the reality for these animals. The factory farming landscape is designed to produce large volumes of yield for the smallest price possible, using cost-saving measures and techniques like preventative antibiotics and extreme confinement. A lifetime of confinement is unnatural and difficult for animals to endure. Battery cages, smaller than the size of an A4 piece of paper, as well as gestation and farrowing crates, is in addition to the most direct abuses inflicted on these animals, such as forced insemination, debeaking, tail docking, and cruel and inhumane slaughter methods, to name a few. In South Africa, there's also a growing practice of the live export of animals, where animals such as sheep, cattle, and goats are transported live on ships across the world, sometimes for weeks at a time, just to be killed. Factory farming is rife with the inhumane treatment of animals. South Africa relies heavily on animal protein and products to feed our approximately 60 million inhabitants. The country has seen a major increase in the consumption of animal products over the last few decades. With these increases, factory farms are continuing to develop all over the country. Not only is this model unsustainable, but its true costs are hidden, not borne by the producers or even reflected in the cost of the product, but rather externally borne by the South African public unwittingly. Furthermore, the government provides the animal agricultural industry with subsidies or funding from public funds to support them and to ensure that the price of these animals and the products remains low or competitive. This essentially means that taxpayer money is being utilized to promote an industry which has long-term detrimental consequences for humans, the planet, and animals. South Africa has the highest rate of meat consumption in Africa, with the average person in the country consuming between 60 and 70 kilograms of meat per person per year. Today, the 10th of May, South Africa hits a milestone, Meat Exhaustion Day. Early on in this 5th month of the year, South Africa has exceeded our annual animal meat intake. This is not in line with scientific planetary health diet and is of major concern to us. Consuming a high amount of animal products has a negative impact not only on animal welfare, but also on the climate and our health. Annually, the nation kills over 1 billion chickens alone, or approximately 20 million birds per week. There are some stakeholders who believe that animal-based production industries have room for further growth, and incentives are allocated to the animal production in the country. The government is one such stakeholder who is intent on increasing the amount of animals killed for food. Through initiatives such as the Poultry Master Plan, it aims to greatly expand local production and drive domestic demand, as well as exports, amongst other aims. The farming of wild animals raises its own additional and unique problems and challenges. The public largely believes that there are appropriate safeguards to protect against harms caused by animal agriculture, or that there are suitable laws in place relating to the farming of animals. Unfortunately, this is not the case, as there are major gaps in regulation, lack of specific standards, and failure to enforce laws where they do exist. A shift in current farming models is needed, not only to fight the climate crisis, but to improve the well-being of the environment, humans, and animals. The government should put food and farming at the heart of urgent climate mitigation action and implement policies to enable this transition to sustainable, healthy, and diverse food systems in which animals are treated with respect and empathy. At COP28, 160 countries have signed on to the COP28 UAE Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems, and Climate Action, committing to strengthening efforts to integrate agriculture and food systems into national climate plans and revisiting their policies and public support related to agriculture and food systems. Addressing the food-climate nexus is existential and essential for meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement and achieving food security, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. We call for the South African government to sign on to the COP28 UAE Declaration on Sustainable Food Systems and Climate Action. South Africa's intensive livestock farm industry practices lead to disease outbreaks and also worsens climate change. 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are classed as zoonotic. But the problem is not the animals as such, but rather human behavior and how we treat animals. Unfortunately, the question is not if, but when the next pandemic will take place if we do not change our way of treating animals and nature. The root causes of pandemics are tied to animal suffering. Factors that can trigger pathogen emergence, spread, and mutation include a high number of animals kept, traded, transported, and slaughtered, cramped in overcrowded environments, and poor hygiene conditions. These conditions stress animals, suppress their immune systems, and make them sick. So the simple calculation scientists made is, if we improve animal welfare and protect nature, we can secure our own health. One Health is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to save billions of animals by improving animal welfare and ending high-risk practices. And that's the link between preventing pandemics and improving animal welfare. A situation analysis carried in a PAWS report on zoonotic diseases in South Africa found that due to the animals' high susceptibility and highly intensive conditions on farms, with thousands of animals caged in close proximity to each other, the factory farming industry has been proven to be a possible reservoir for mutations and pathogens. Ending factory farming to prevent pandemics requires a transition to food production systems that are more sustainable, more efficient in terms of land use, protective of habitats and biodiversity, and resilient to disease outbreaks. The only way to achieve this is by reducing livestock numbers and ensuring high welfare standards for the farmed animals. Antimicrobial resistance and highly pathogenic avian influenza are just two of the many threats factory farming amplifies. If we don't change the system, the next pandemic could emerge in a factory farm in South Africa. We need to acknowledge the link between animal welfare and increasing pandemic risk and follow a One Health approach on national, regional, and international level. South Africa and the rest of the world must commit to ending animal suffering to stop future pandemics. COVID-19 showed the dangers of ignoring the impact of animal cruelty. PAWS calls for animal welfare to be prioritized in pandemic prevention strategies and legislations. Preventing pandemics at the source is a key pillar of pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. For greater cooperation between the animal, human, and environmental health sectors, stakeholders must embrace a multifactorial and multi-sectoral approach to gain the maximum benefit out of this improvement. We need to recognize the importance of preventing zoonotic spillover and not just responding when there's already an outbreak. A One Health approach is essential to address this, and this should include integrated surveillance, addressing anthropocentric drivers of disease emergence, understanding infection dynamics in natural host and environment, and developing and implementing risk reduction activities. We cannot afford another pandemic and need to do things differently and not in silos. To broaden the One Health vision, as for PAWS, we recognize that looking after our well-being and that of animals, people, and the environment is paramount. In conclusion, life in a cage is a death sentence for many animals. The imprisonment of animals in our zoos, farms, backyards, circuses, research laboratories, and enclosures are a death sentence for us and our environment. The interconnectedness of animal welfare, human well-being, and their environment can and will secure us a healthy future, because when they suffer, we suffer. 4PAWS is calling on all political parties in South Africa to have animal well-being and sentience in their political manifesto. Having borne witness over the years to exhausted lionesses languishing in cages, mourning the loss of their cubs, hearing the pitiful cries of those cubs searching for their mothers, walking in our communities where those that we live with are neglected and brutally treated, and seeing firsthand animals that cannot stand or move or display any natural behaviors. When I think of that, all that comes to mind is that we have to do better, starting immediately. Let us educate ourselves, our children, communities, leaders, and politicians. Let us build together a common consciousness and empathy to live kinder, and let us act together to create a worldwide animal welfare movement driven by scalable change of human behavior and systems so that animals can live their best lives possible. I close once again with the words of Maya Angelou. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind, floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. Thank you.
Trying to gauge the height of my next guest. Shame on us. And maybe therein lies the biggest issue, is this practiced, maybe necessary apathy and disconnect. If you can imagine me applying my algorithm now of testing the health and where this society is, looking at that canary in the mine, you might think that all hope is lost. And I've got to say, Fiona, you've done me a massive disservice, because the next guest is a self-declared pessimist who I thought I could imbue with my positive attitude and my unending optimism. And I thought tonight was the night I was going to do it. But after that, I don't know, it's going to be a steep climb. The bottom line is here, we need traction in the political space right now. And as much as we are stepping outside of party politics and looking at the notion of one health, one welfare, living kinder for all of us, the bottom line is we need people to act within their individual capacities, within politics, within government, within the private sector. And this next gentleman certainly does that. However, his pessimism might speak to the job that he has. And every time we connect, it's quite dynamic, because generally he only has a microphone in his hand when that has hit the fan. And there is a good reason why he is the man to embrace that job. Obviously, the Safety and Security Directorate himself, JP Smith, is the lead directorate driving the implementation of one of the 5 pillars of the strategic focus areas of the city, that being a safe city. From humble beginnings in Kuilsrivier, you might be interested to know that he actually spent time abroad teaching English, and that's how he balances out his CV. But he has obviously played a vital role in dealing with disaster management as it plays out every day, and that's often when we connect. So I do have a huge amount of respect for the job that he currently applies every day. But I thought I would throw in, just very quickly from his bio, it says his interests include paragliding, kayaking, politics, and animals. Hopefully not in that order for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Alderman JP Smith.
Fiona, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to match what you did now. So you have to lower your expectations substantially. Good evening, everyone. Goeienaand, Molweni. Assalamu alaikum, namaste, shalom. I will tell you that the images you showed of the factory farming, I think should be obligatory for anybody who continues to eat meat. So I have, and sorry, I know that sounds like some pandering, but I should add some confessional to that. I have twice lapsed back into eating meat after originally witnessing a pig being slaughtered on a farm where I used to do horse riding. That made me stop eat meat for the first time. I then started later again. The other time I stopped was because of seeing a sheep being slaughtered, but I am now, I would say, permanently cured. I will die in my current format. And you cannot continue to eat meat after you've seen the documentary Earthlings. And that is what I think should be obligatory watching for everybody who persists in eating dead animals. So before I start sermonizing on that topic, I will tell you that my commitment to animal welfare is an emotional and a practical one. So it's emotional because I see in every animal that I find on the street the animals that live with me in my house. I have 3 dogs and 2 cats. And in those animals, the bond I share with them and the relationship I have with them, I find that in animals that I see on the street. Yesterday we did a metal theft raid with our mayor, and while we were at one of the properties, my job in these raids has become pimping the people to the SPCA. So I am the one who sends then, we actually have a rescue group and a special recognition for Mr. Uli Front from Dad, which doesn't translate as well in English, but that is the only animal ambulance in the city. Well done, and may your initiative succeed and prosper. I'm the one who will then call and get them to come and rescue. My middle doggy, Sassy, is one of those rescues from a drug raid in Bonteheuwel. So it is practical in that I do think that you can measure a society by how they treat animals. This is an old truism, but I think it is very true. There's some good solid research that says that how we treat the most vulnerable around us, how we treat those lives and creatures of people who are completely dependent on our goodwill and our whim determines what kind of society is a barometer of our own moral health and the ethical nature of our society. And I strongly believe that. I see that in the socialization programs that they use to try and reintegrate people who have ended up in prison. And I saw that in the program that Cicely Bloomberg from Adopt a Pet used to run, her humane education programs and similar programs that many others run. So I do think that this is an important indicator of what our society is about and what our society will continue to become. Those practices we insist on teaching or tolerating will determine which way we go. So that said, local government is in a very awkward space in that we don't have a clear mandate for animal welfare. We have a very awkward mandate. We derive our legal powers or mandate more or less from the animal, from no specific animal mandate. We derive it from an environmental health, nuisance, public open space regulation functions in Schedule 4B and 5B of the Constitution. So not ideal. Certainly the drafters of the Constitution did not do this sector any favors with how the Constitution was drafted and those weak definitions. So I'm glad that there are multiple legislators and members of parliament here, because that is certainly something that in our legislation needs to be improved. Local government needs a strong, clear, and explicit mandate, and in fact so does provincial and national government. So as local government, the city is therefore very dependent on our relationship with the animal welfare organizations. We rely on their skills, their facilities, their resources, their conscience, and their motivation. So I've attempted to make myself and the city the best allies we can to these animal welfare societies. And if I can just say as a brief political aside, I've tried to do that also in my political party. I've proposed and supported a number of motions to our federal Congress that tries to compel my colleagues around the rest of the country into supporting animal welfare and having a clear understanding of what their job is to support financially, bolster or enable animal welfare organizations and to uphold the principles and service delivery commitments to animal welfare. One of those resolutions relates to ensuring that we formalize our role in supporting animal welfare, that we're explicit about what we owe them through the legally mandated SPCA, but also all of its civil society partners. And that, I think, must remain a very important mission so that they can be adequately supported to perform the function that our communities and our cities and our municipalities depend on them for. Far too often I have seen, and this applied also in the past to Cape Town, still applies, but less so now, that we shirk our duties and shoulder onto civil society with no recompense a duty of care in the animal welfare space, and where government itself owns very little of that responsibility, especially for companion animals in our communities. This became particularly unpalatable when the animal welfare was removed as a potential beneficiary from the Lotto funding. It was a particularly unpalatable occasion, and there was a lot of pressure applied by more sensible people. The city spoke out loudly about it, and in the end that was corrected, and animal welfare organizations can now again benefit from Lotto funding. Another one of those resolutions that I managed to get our Congress to pass was that all political representatives will work towards establishing some kind of animal welfare organization in the municipalities or provinces where they're at. So over time, I can tell you that my involvement in the city and animal welfare has allowed me to gain some insights in the challenges that animals face and those that care for them. This led to, amongst others, the establishment of the Animal Control Unit in our law enforcement services, and gluing on every conceivable function to that Animal Control Unit. It became the nexus for all kinds of other things we wanted to do, but did not have a clear mandate to approach. We've toughened our animal bylaws in the city. And where are you, Tony? Tony Gerrans, in his current state as chairperson of the Cape Animal Welfare Forum, and previously in his state as in his role as one of the advisors to that forum, has been instrumental in sharpening the provisions of many of the provisions of our animal keeping bylaw, including the most recent one. It led to the outsourcing of our animal care and rehoming functions when the city impounds strays, and much more. So perhaps most importantly, out of all the things that have happened, is that we created this Cape Animal Welfare Forum, this space where we sit and talk face-to-face regularly with the animal welfare sector, and through working with them, we have learned a lot, and they have compelled us or pushed us to do a great deal better. So I don't need to explain to you what animal welfare means. Normally when I go to communities, I talk to them about what constitutes animal welfare and what it means for an animal to be healthy and comfortable and well-nourished and safe and able to express its innate behavior, etc. But as you said in your invite, I will be preaching to the choir here, as Graham has said also. So all I can tell you is that there are many officials from the SPCA, RO, PDSA, Animal Welfare Organization, AACL, Dog, Tears, Cartels Protection Association, PAWS, and many more that are on the front lines every day, often on a shoestring budget and with way less support than they should be getting. And the jobs they do are incredibly important in terms of combating the mistreatment of animals, dealing with malnutrition, animals being kept in enclosures that are too small, lack shade, have minimal privacy, animals being chained up, mistreated, experiencing suffering due to poor hygiene or overcrowding, or just general neglect. So the city expanded its bylaws and our responsibilities, and we've done a lot of training jointly with these animal welfare organizations and sent our Animal Control Unit staff to be trained by the Cartels Protection Association's inspectorate, to be trained by the SPCA and the other organizations, so that they understand the world through the eyes of those inspectors. That extends also into more complex spaces where legal and constitutional roles become even more disputed, namely baboon management, which has become a very sensitive topic to talk about. So the city and the provincial government have both put in significant effort in improving the interactions between baboons and humans, but I think everybody will agree a lot more can and should be done. I do want to say thank you for the establishment of the Baboon Management Task Team, which I understand from Dave came out of a request in the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee for greater collaboration between the spheres of government, and that has been a very positive step. As a result, we now have national government, sandparks, the city, provincial government, all around the table working towards finding solutions, and that's really positive. So it's with the boots on the ground that I think the real heavy lifting is mainly done. Daily, our animal control unit deals with many complaints, many of those initiated by CORF members, Cape Animal Welfare Forum. In the last 9 months, we've attended to 4,234 service requests relating to animals. That's 2,600 impoundments, 127 operations that we planned and did on our own. That's one every third day. We issued 250 compliance notices, 390 fines or notices in terms of our animal bylaw. We opened 37 criminal dockets for abuse or otherwise, and we attended to 56 dogfighting complaints, one of which with the effervescent and indomitable and absolutely amazing Jaco Pieterse, who I'm a huge fan of. If anybody has a T-shirt of his, I will proudly wear it. And I will tell you that Jaco is also in his spare time, as if he has such a thing, a law enforcement reservist. And he became a law enforcement reservist so that he could wield the peace officer powers in addition to the inspectorate powers of the SPCA, and I'm so proud of him. So he initiated an operation where we clamped down on a dogfighting ring with special dogfighting arena in Atlantis. That owner of that facility got 18 months prison time, and well done to Jaco. But the enforcement stuff is just a small part of it. There's a great deal more that we do around combating animal abuse, and there is much more that this relationship with the animal welfare organizations and CORF, and I must mention the Cartels Protection Association, has led to. And so there is a series of interventions that has been born from that relationship. One of those, for instance, is the joint intervention or the campaign and the task team we led to fight dogfighting. We have an awareness campaign that goes around with loud halos in different communities where law enforcement will drive up and down with the animal welfare organizations, telling people that cruelty is not sport, offering a reward of between 5,000 and 20,000 rand for information leading to dogfighting, and that's driven many of those tip-offs that have led to those arrests and those 56 cases. So that partnership is becoming increasingly more powerful. It has seen increased funding for animal welfare organizations. It's 14.7 million in this year alone for the larger organizations, especially those with inspectorates and clinics. Those who, and that does not even include our contractual relationships with them around mass sterilization and in relation to animal care and shelter. We have joint training initiatives that I've referred to. We are currently working on, again, updating our animal bylaw. It gets new refinements all the time. The Cape Animal Welfare Forum now influences our events and decides when we issue event permits. We have joint campaigns around animal adoption, for instance. During COVID, when a lot of people were relinquishing their animals, we started with an animal adoption campaign initiated by them, and secured donations of pet food for indigent communities, which CORF and its members distributed. Ultimately, I think for me, one of the most exciting interventions that came out was PAWS, the PAWS Animal Adoption Fair, monthly on the Sea Point Promenade, where the animal welfare organizations all have a get-together and where pet lovers can bring their animals and adopt more. And that, I must say, has really been a wonderful success story, and I really enjoy going there. I feel obliged to buy at least one thing from every stall. So my budget per visit now is at least 2,000 rand, and that gets more challenging all the time. And so I am the current patron of the Cape Animal Welfare Forum, and it's probably on that basis that I'm here. That's 64 animal welfare organizations who have united to work together, to campaign together, to hold government accountable together, to lobby government for legislation, and to drive best practice and generally be a voice for domestic and other animals in Cape Town. And I really want to sing the praise of those organizations. Tony, in his role as the chair at the moment, it can be a very discordant group of people to keep together, but keeping them all on the same page is absolutely essential for ensuring that government is kept on the same page. Because if you argue with each other, it's very easy for us to duck and dive and avoid responsibility. If you speak with one voice, you compel us to understand one message. So I strongly support that mission and wish you all the best of luck. You have been a powerful force of change through that Animal Welfare Forum. And I want to say that I believe that every municipality and every provincial government should be compelled, Mr. Singh and others should be compelled, Travis and Dave, to have such an animal welfare organization, and that the representatives of those fora should serve on a national forum, which national government in the different portfolio committees is compelled to engage with periodically, so that government can hear their stories and understand the challenges that they are working with. So I'm very glad, again, as I said, to have these various members of the National Assembly here. I'm privileged that I have Dave and Norko Masipa and Travis to guide me and to regularly assist me with more technical matters. And I can tell you that local government would benefit a great deal from having the rest of the parliamentary portfolio committees and others to periodically engage us on these issues. There should be at least once a year a time when local, provincial, and national government representatives who deal with animal welfare or are designated by the municipalities to do so get together and talk about this. And the absence of such places and such fora is painful and is a weakness to all of us. So Fiona, to you and your team, may you consider me a ready and eager asset, your cattle prod in government, if you will excuse the expression. May you call on me when you need any assistance from the city. I thank you.
Don't worry, JP, I've filmed at Dog and Tears on many occasions, and of course after the first 4 times I now have 2 cats and 2 dogs, and it's gotten to the point that my wife, I have to declare to her when I'm going to shoot at any one of those places so that she can keep eats on me. The absurdity here is every morning I will interview the engineers, the conservationists, the student scientists who have answers to every single one of these problems. They are there. The structure is not there. There are structures, they just don't facilitate the kind of action we need, which adds even more gravitas to the achievements of our next guest. When set against that, the lack of rallying around what she is championing for, which means we've got to create our own structures. We've got to create the forums that can collectively bring people together. For far too long, we have seen organizations fighting for the same little slice of a pie that nobody can find. We know it's there somewhere, but no one should be working against each other, which brings to bear the power of one particular forum, the Wildlife Animal Protection Forum here in South Africa, which is a collective doing very big things. And here to represent that collective, obviously she has her own very personal journey within this conservation arc. And I'll give you just a little bit of her CV because it does come again with that gravitas. Respected for her vocal stance on poaching, culling, slaughtering of animals, she campaigns against all animal abuse and the property status of animals, which allows them to be owned by individuals and organizations. One of the gateways that needs to be addressed. As an activist at WITS, she holds a BA honors degree in history, a master's degree in environmental sociology, and a diploma in archival science, because it's all required for the work that she does every day. Ladies and gentlemen, representing the Wildlife Animal Protection Forum here in South Africa, put your hands together for Michelle Pickover.
Thank you. I need to take my glasses off. Should I put them on? This is the bad side of being tall. I really must thank PAWS for arranging this important event and for inviting me to speak. I cannot really talk about the Wildlife Animal Protection Forum of South Africa, or WAPSA for short, without referring to the historical context, because it has a lot to do with where WAPSA is located and what we focus on. In 1994, those of us that had been fighting the animal protection battle for years were optimistic that our new democracy would also bring positive changes for non-human animals in South Africa, precisely because of the systemic commonalities which oppress both humans and non-humans. Clearly, other animals were also victims of the systems of colonialism and apartheid. In essence, what we were advocating for, and still advocate for, is inclusive justice, one struggle, showing compassion across the species barrier and building a better future in a post-apartheid South Africa. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu observed, and I quote, "I have seen at firsthand how injustice gets overlooked when the victims are powerless or vulnerable, when they have no one to speak up for them and no means of representing themselves. Animals are in precisely that position. Unless we are mindful of their interests and speak out loudly on their behalf, abuse and cruelty goes unchallenged," unquote. Other animals are sentient, conscious, feeling and thinking beings. They have complex needs and relations. They have a will to live, and they play key roles in ecological systems necessary for our own existence. They have a life before they are traded, captured, enslaved, hunted, and killed. They have agency. Indeed, they have their own cultures and traditions. Nonetheless, they are conveniently kept in large amorphous groups and then disassembled and packaged in ways that reinforce the collective and conceal their individuality. They are viewed as a source of income or as part of an aesthetically pleasing landscape, mere scenery, a backdrop to human activities. They are refigured, devoid of identities, and to all intents and purposes, almost invisible and imaginary. If our non-human compatriots could speak our languages, though, they would tell us they do not want to be our food, our trophies, our entertainment, or our research tools. After the death of apartheid, there was a window of opportunity for inclusive justice to be part of the process of building a new society and for the interests of non-human animals to be included in our new constitution. Sadly, this never happened. And in relation to wild animals, there was no transformation of policies, but rather a seamless continuation, and in many ways, a speeding up of existing exploitative practices and beneficiaries, including the so-called wildlife industry. Historically, South Africa has always taken a pro-consumptive use stance in relation to wild animals. In the past, it was so that a few people could benefit and have private hunting grounds. Now, it is located within the language of development. So in a very real sense, the South African government was, and still is, a formidable barrier to those fighting for justice for animals. In the wildlife space, government was also only meeting with industry via the Wildlife Forum, and consequently, their agendas were driving government policies. Indeed, it is because the state was not taking any legislative responsibility that it has, to all intents and purposes, outsourced and devolved animal welfare issues to under-resourced animal welfare NGOs. This is all particularly concerning because we live in the Anthropocene 6 extinction crisis, and humanity is the cause of this catastrophic collapse of nature's ecosystems, which is killing species and disrupting vast, intricate webs of life. Currently, there is an average 69% decline in wild populations globally. This is of existential importance. Clearly, our fates are intertwined, and what we do to the wildlife, we do to ourselves. Because nature is in trouble, we are in trouble. Further massive losses in biodiversity can be prevented, but only through radical transformative change. The world is speeding headlong towards disaster in flagrant disregard of science, and rhetoric, policy making, and global agreements thus far have amounted to very little. A new moral compass is desperately needed to guide and inform the institutional and conceptual changes necessary in this world. So, getting back to South Africa, there was no channel available for animal protection organizations to address their concerns to the government. WAPSA was therefore explicitly set up and designed as a vehicle to engage with the government on wildlife issues and to put wild animals onto the political agenda on the basis of ethical and compassionate conservation and harmonious coexistence within nature. Our members share clearly articulated principles that are part of our founding document which was initiated in 2016. Our common goal is to safeguard and protect wild animals and their welfare and well-being, as well as biodiversity, individual species, individual animals, and the interests of fragile people. All our activities are underpinned by an understanding that the interrelationship between environmental protection, animal well-being, conservation, and the value of dignity, compassion, and humaneness are foundational to our constitutional democracy. We also advocate for the concepts of Ubuntu, the intrinsic value of wild animals, and an integrative policy approach. Also key to WAPS's activities is the understanding that there's an urgent need to reimagine human-animal relations and that animal welfare and climate change are intertwined. Currently, there are 30 organizational members of WAPSA, including other large networks and movements, for example, the Climate Justice Charter movement. The WAPSA members span various areas of expertise, including advocacy, education, rights, welfare, conservation, and faith-based approaches. So we have species specialists, rescue and rehabilitation, legal and litigation, research, investigation, conflict mitigation and mediation, food sovereignty, community support and engagement, and indigenous knowledge. Where there were previously silos, WAPSA fosters collaboration, solidarity, unity, and action to powerfully and collectively lobby, campaign, mainstream, and provide solutions to critical challenges and burning issues facing wild animals, nature, and people in South Africa. So to conclude, WAPSA's strength lies in our unified approach to addressing these pressing issues from diverse perspectives in an ethos of care and within the framework of inclusive social justice, so that our society can be transformed and so that we can all become good citizens of the bio community. Aluta continua. Thank you very much.
How are you feeling? More positive, a little bit more pessimistic? I know it's difficult. It's very difficult to hold a mirror up to ourselves in this way, but seeing that level of action around just one individual and what she's been able to draw and build around her gives me great hope. So my next guest, I have a feeling I need to introduce her to my wife to show how far I could take this notion. Okay, she has nearly 200 rescued animals, including pigs, sheep, goats, geese, roosters, a duck, I don't have a duck yet, blue crane, and senior dogs and cats. And we use the term senior because we know the puppies are easy to adopt. It's the seniors, the best dogs that need those homes. She is a force of nature within nature. She has made an incredible impact, and she literally does live her purpose every day. She is an award-winning community activist and obviously a philanthropist who works tirelessly on behalf of animals and the communities around them. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for an incredible human being, Nicola Vernon. Nicola, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Graham. I stand before you somewhat exhausted. I've had 15 hours sleep since May the 1st because I am raising a baby lamb, and he needs feeding every 2 hours through the night. And I am not as young as I used to be, as you can see, and so forgive me if I start babbling or bleating. So I'm here to represent the Farmed Animal Alliance, which comprises 18 members who represent farm animals in all of their manifestations through law, anti-animal cruelty, anti-animal testing. We have 5 farm animal sanctuaries, including my own, on the board, and our aim is to keep farm animals left, front and center in the conversation from grassroots level to government level. And we write to politicians. We like to ask them what are their thoughts about farm animals. We've asked every political party leader for what their manifestos contain about farm animals. But the FAA have asked me to talk to you tonight about one of my sanctuary's own programs called Pigs to Plants. When we started rescuing farm animals some 10 years ago, we became aware of some of the parlous situations that farm animals are kept in the hearts of our communities. And the plight of pigs is particularly abhorrent because of the way in which they are kept. Some of our most vulnerable communities see these pigs being kept knee-deep in feces in tiny little little pens made of roof sheeting, rusting fencing. They are often run as a side hustle, these piggeries, so these animals are barely attended to, often don't have access to clean water or any water at all, and sadly are supported by the Department of Agriculture, who, regardless of the state of the welfare of the animals, provide free food and free medication, including antibiotics, to the farmers farming in this way. And in the village where I live, there are 4 villages in our valley of Greyton, Hunardendal, Worcester Crowell and Bereaville, known as the Valley of Grace. There are 95 farmers farming around about 800 pigs. In the whole of South Africa, the informal pig sector comprises nearly 50% of all the pigs in South Africa, some 650,000 animals. And these animals are in the heart of communities where adults and children see them existing in these grotesque conditions on their way to school, on their way to church, on their way to the shops, constantly reaffirming that their own sense of what is an acceptable level of abuse in their own community. These pigs set the lowest bar for acceptable abuse in a community. It brutalizes the children, it prevents them from becoming well-rounded adults, and it stunts their emotional maturity, and it creates a cycle of abuse that is perpetuated in the community. We have worked with this quite a long time in other manifestations, in that I founded Greyton Transition Town some 15 years ago, where we tried to bring more fresh fruit and vegetables into the heart of the community. And as a result, there is now quite a big demand for vegetables from our school gardens. Every one of the 6 school gardens in Greyton now has beautiful vegetables which support the feeding scheme and which also supply the local residents of the valley. So we built on this, and we established a program called Pigs to Plants, where it took us a bit of time. Our first farmer took about 3 years of persuasion, and we had to go down the welfare route with him a bit, providing straw and feed for his pigs, which is not really what we wanted to do, but our agenda was to try and win his trust and persuade him not to farm with pigs and allow us to support him to cease trading with his pigs and instead let us set him up with a vegetable garden. I wish I was allowed to show photographs, because one photo really says 1,000 words. The transformation of these piggeries is nothing short of miraculous. Where once there were dirty pens with desperate animals living horrible lives, there are now verdant, lush, income-generating food gardens, which are creating more money for the farmers than ever with pigs, and which are also bringing fresh vegetables into the heart of communities where they have been so badly lacking. 10 years ago, I walked into shops in our more vulnerable communities, and I couldn't find a single lettuce leaf. And then you go to the clinic and you see people suffering from all the diseases caused by not having access to fresh, healthy, locally grown organic vegetables. Instead, they are suffering from the diseases caused by living amongst and eating these animals who have been raised in the worst possible way. We have taken pigs who have subsequently died and put from these communities, and we have then had post-mortems, and we have found a number of zoonotic diseases such as encephalitis, meningitis, hepatitis, huge parasite loads, viral and bacterial infections. And many have had antibiotics chucked at them because they're given out free, and those have all entered into the meat and have infected the community and are causing antimicrobial resistance in the heart of communities who need those antibiotics to cope with the diseases they are getting from eating these animals. It's a vicious cycle which has to stop. And what we want to do is to build a critical mass, if you like, of vegetable gardens that we can convince the Department of Agriculture to come and visit so that they can see that we have another way of bringing food security, healthy food security, to our most vulnerable communities and bringing an income to emerging farmers. We teach our farmers about basic business management by biodynamic farming and succession planting. We help them to grow affordable vegetables for their communities and then premium vegetables that can generate more income for them. We're developing a brand called the Graceful Garden, coming from the Valley of Grace where we live. And the Graceful Garden will produce premium products such as lettuce pillows, stir-fry packs, preserves, jams, sauces, and we will help the farmers to earn more income in that way. So we also add to this whole package our other outreach program, which is humane education in our schools. And we did start off with the help of Louise van der Merwe from the Humane Education Trust, teaching children not to abuse animals, not to put a dog on a short chain. We've now extended that program with the Institute for Humane Education in the United States, which takes a more holistic, rounded view of humane education. So the end result is that children don't even want to put their dogs on short chains in the first place. So we're teaching teachers the solutionary framework put forward by the Institute for Humane Education, which is basically challenging children with real-life issues, delivering the curriculum in this way. And they divide up into groups. They each appoint a leader, a spokesperson, and they find solutions. It's teaching the children to become resilient, self-sufficient, solution-finding, critical thinking children, which combined with the work we're doing with the Pigs to Plants program, transitioning away from pigs to plants, is actually causing quite a lot of interest in our little village. And we're hoping that both these programs have the capacity to be rolled out nationally. And I must thank Tony and your team from the Humane Society of South Africa, the Institute of... Where are you from? The Humane Society International of Africa. Sorry, Tony. I'll get it right in the end. Because without his funding, we would not have been able to put this together, along with the Olsen Animal Trust and the Lush Charity Pot from the UK, which together have put in about 1.3 million to enable us to get this program off the ground. And I hope that ultimately we will be able to attract funding for these farmers to make their transitions from the Department of Agriculture, so that instead of putting the funding into supporting these low welfare, disease-generating, informal pig processes, we can actually have them go into the vegetable gardens. And this is one of the big things I am worried about with the growing awareness of the situation with factory farming. And I've already seen some dialogue coming from the Department of Agriculture about this, that they're going to encourage more emerging farmers and informal farmers to go into this sector, which would be very bad news indeed. So I hope that, at least from this conversation I'm having with you guys today, we might find contact with the Department of Agriculture so that we can maybe start the dialogue sooner rather than later, and see a real change within our communities from the pigs to the plants. Thank you.
Just another day in the life. Really doesn't need a script to read from, just comes up and does what she does every single day. Thank you so much for being that voice. And for highlighting so many of the areas that we all know need to be focused on right now. It's just about making it real in the real world. And it's one thing to say that people will step out of their professional lane to become purpose-driven. They'll have some life-changing experience, and that will change the course of their life. And that's generally when they make it into TV land, is they've done something, discovered their purpose, and that's worth putting them on TV in front of millions of people. Then you get those individuals who ply their professional trade with purpose, who choose to live in that lane, and that's where the reality starts to sink in and we start to see real action. Now, after that slightly, no offense, butchered description of his title, I better get this one right. Tony Gerrans is respected not only within animal welfare, but certainly within the legal framework. And except for his work from the Human Society International Southern Africa programs, he has worked with government, with private business, and the non-for-profit sector that I believe hold the key now in terms of those trusted relationships with the communities that we need to move from sustaining to thriving. And it's amazing, as you highlight, when we get the sustainability right, the community does thrive. They're not just surviving and getting by as they have been, they thrive. Then we see the quantum connections of societal and social growth. We need people to do this every day in their everyday jobs, and that's what he does. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the incredible Tony Gerrans.
Wow, one of the worst things about talking near the end of the evening is that everyone's always taken the material. And that's exactly what's happened tonight. But I think that really speaks to the message that I hope people will take away from this event tonight, that there are a couple of themes about how we interact with animals. We've heard people talk about the overwhelming scientific evidence of their sentience, their complex lives, and how they suffer in the various contexts where we abuse them. We've heard people talk about how animal protection is really an element of our social justice movement, and that is a message that's often lost. We've heard a lot about cooperation, and we've heard a lot about making this a political issue. So I'm going to touch on most of those themes again, so please bear with me if there's a little bit of repetition. But I think those are the real messages that underpin our movement. I think in the last 50 years, the science of animal sentience has really come a huge way. Right? We know now that animals have these complex emotional lives. They have strong relationships both with their own species and other species, and they work actively to avoid the types of harms that we routinely inflict on them. By and large, the mechanisms of our society have not adapted to reflect that new knowledge. We still abuse animals in countless ways, as we've heard tonight, and most of that is routine and accepted in many social contexts. The irony of all of this is that the Constitutional Court has stepped up where the rest of government has lagged, and back in 2018, produced a very progressive judgment which essentially recognized the intrinsic value of animals, and that protecting animals is part of protecting our environment, and indeed is part of the Section 24 right to a safe and protected environment. Our recent work on law reform has also identified that protecting animals speaks to other constitutional rights, indeed the right to dignity, which we heard about earlier, and freedom from violence. So these are all interrelated in the social justice space. And despite this emerging awareness about how all these themes join together, we find that still animals are severely mistreated in ways that are entirely avoidable. I'll talk tonight just a little bit about companion animals. Fiona spoke about the State of Pet Homelessness report, which estimates that there are somewhere near 4 million animals, companion animals, living on the street in South Africa. And those animals, by and large, live fairly dire lives. They're subject to a lot of deliberate abuse, wanton neglect. They are often the victims of accidents. They suffer deprivation of food and water, and often they suffer from preventable disease. Fortunately, South Africa is blessed with a really robust animal protection community. In our recent law reform work, we asked the Department of Social Development for a list of all the animal protection organizations in South Africa, and they produced a list of over 600. And in the work that followed, over 150 of those organizations offered time to help craft a vision for new animal protection law in South Africa. And these organizations do a range of really important work in our societies. They run inspectorates, they run hospitals, they run outreaches, they do humane education, they do training, they do law enforcement, they support government, they do primary healthcare work, they do tick and flea work, and they do sterilization work. And they do that largely with private funds. JP spoke earlier about how in the Western Cape we've managed to come together. We have now the Cape Animal Welfare Forum with 64 such organizations, ranging from large complex organizations with significant budgets who have hospitals and skilled veterinarians on the staff, right down to small individual organizations of one person who works specifically to try rehome a certain type of animal and keep them out of the shelters. Some of the areas that we find that are creating frustration with moving the case for animals forward are government and social apathy, persistent confusion about role clarity and the devolution of government powers. We heard a bit about that earlier. Severely constrained funding in private animal protection movements, poor levels of understanding about animal sentience, sometimes negligent but sometimes deliberately conveyed by industry. And we are also hampered by our ability to influence government policy by a systemic lack of cooperation within our own sector. And here I think we need to look at the things that we can fix quite easily. Fortunately, in Cape Town, we've had support from the political sector, from JP in particular, that has made it possible to come together as the Cape Animal Welfare Forum. And though we've got a long way to go, we've started to cooperate in sensible, meaningful ways to address some of these challenges. This is a difficult ask in South Africa, specifically where so many people still live in really dire circumstances. It's always going to be difficult to carve out time, attention, funding, and political will to serve to work to better the lives of non-human animals when so many humans are still living in precarious social and economic circumstances. Even a competent and honest national government might not be able or willing alone to fix the problems that we've heard about tonight. But I would like to argue that choosing between people and animal well-being is a false dichotomy. What we really need is to recognize that these are two intertwined branches that come from the same root. We heard Michelle speak very eloquently earlier about how oppression manifests through the same channels, and indeed we see that often. The correlation between oppression of all vulnerable groups is often very obvious and very stark. Choosing between animal and human care is, as a result, a false narrative. We cannot hope to build caring communities free from violence for people if we continue to neglect and abuse the animals who live in those communities. It's up to us as the animal protection sector to lead by example and to educate, incentivize, cajole, and yes, also demand from government that they partner us as the private sector in meaningful and tangible ways to improve the lives for all animals, humans and non-human alike. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for everything that you represent within this broader conversation. I'm loving seeing the dots being connected in this way. I'm also loving everyone trying their hardest not to race off to the bathroom. If you need to go to the bathroom, feel free. No one's going to take it personally if you have to pop out. But we want to keep things moving forward because we still have a fair bit of really powerful information to engage with right now. Vital information. Now, when I talk about the young South Africans that inspire me, that fill my cup up every single day, every now and then I am introduced to a spirit animal, someone who embodies that for me and fills my cup back up. Set against all of the negativity, this vacuum of negativity and trauma that is happening all around us as we speak, I am given hope by the young South Africans that are putting their hand up and acting on their purpose, and she certainly fits this bill. And it's rather humbling seeing what she's accomplished at a very young age. She is a climate justice activist. She's been actively involved in policy making, advocacy, and diplomacy since her university years, which were like last year. And she came to, and I'm not even joking, this all, of course, came to a pinnacle, and this is where you might have seen and heard more of her as the News 24 Future Young Mandela Award recipient in just 2022. She currently has the position of Campaigns Officer for Climate and Pandemics and Animal Welfare at for PAWS here in South Africa. Put your hands together for Seliwe Shavambu.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for honoring our invite and joining us for our very first State of the Animal Welfare Address as for PAWS in South Africa. This evening, I have the pleasure and the opportunity to join on stage our country director to deliver the survey result of the State of the Animal Welfare in South Africa. This was done through findings of a number of surveys that were conducted over a period of time by PAWS in South Africa. The survey's aim was to get an understanding of the state of animal welfare in South Africa. And these findings have helped both develop the address that we all heard this evening and the best ways to respond to the concerns raised in the survey. While we continue revealing, rescuing and protecting suffering animals, animal welfare has not yet achieved a high political profile in South Africa. The year 2024 is election year, and animal welfare should be on the political agenda. It is essential that government and policymakers recognize the state of animal welfare because politics is there to reflect the will of the people, the will of the voters. And through this survey, we have found that 86% of South Africans think that the state of animal welfare is bad. We also understand that we cannot stand idly by whilst our government abandons promises and commitments made to both the public and animals, especially when these broken promises result in millions of animals continuing to suffer needlessly. As an animal welfare foundation, we are committed to companion and stray animals, farm animals, wild animals under human control, and animals in disaster, conflict zones worldwide. These results paint a picture of the animal welfare we deserve. It also serves as a call to action, not only to government, but to the consumer, the meat and dairy industry, the farmers, policymakers, and animal welfare organizations alike. The results call on us to become the authoritative voice for animals and not let their future be pre-decided. We have the power to demand that they are no longer mistreated and no longer have to endure the suffering under direct human influence. 90% of South Africans expressed that more efforts are required to make the public aware of big cat farming and trade, and that South Africa's reputation is damaged due to the export of big cats and their parts. 93% call on government to avail funding for the provision of veterinary services in underprivileged communities, while 86% believe that dog and cat sterilization should be mandatory for the stray population management. For farm animals, 93% of South Africans feel that we need stricter and improved laws for the protection of animals in our farms, whilst 89% urge the government to stop promoting inhumane farming practices. These findings have further revealed that 75% of South Africans are aware that factory farming contributes significantly to climate change through the greenhouse gas emissions, and that 85% are willing to pay more for meat, eggs, and dairy if produced in a more humane way. 76% of South Africans are aware that all animals suffer in factory farms due to inhumane practices, and a staggering 92% would prefer if all South African meat, dairy, and eggs came from free-range farms. Tonight, we urge government to support sustainable farming models to feed South Africa's growing population humanely, sustainably, and affordably. We need to do better for animals in the wild, in our farms, in our homes, for animal welfare worldwide. PAWS will keep fighting and campaigning for animals and keep animal welfare firmly on the political agenda. We will do everything in our power to ensure that government reprioritizes animal welfare and delivers their promises. The animals will thank you, and I thank you.
It's the quiet confidence of someone so young. It's like she knows something that we don't know. Maybe she's just not jaded like we are, carrying the baggage that we are carrying through. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our final speaker here. And by the end of this evening, I've got to say, maybe my opinion of politicians might have changed just a little bit. And I thank you for that. I thank you for every role player here, brave enough to do what you do every day. Now, when we talk about a jewel in a glittering crown, how does the Great African Sea Forest, a 1,000-kilometer stretch of kelp forest from Cape Town to Namibia Sound? Why is that amazing to me? Because that's a news story. That's the kind of story that will get retold, that will propagate what we are trying to achieve. And in my land, in TV world, we just need that thread, that X factor, that one thing. And that is what tonight is about, creating those collaborative efforts that produce those moments that can educate those children, that turn the wild, the ecosystem, biodiversity, the lion, into the totem that it needs to be, the emotional driver that it needs to be, but it requires people to, again, do it in the real world. He has a master's degree from UCT in marine and environmental law, which might inform his purpose. His current projects include, as I've said, working within government to create actionable ideas like the Great Sea Forest. Please put your hands together for Chief of Staff and General Legal Counsel to the Inkatha Freedom Party, Advocate Anthony Mitchell.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Graham. You've totally thrown my entire presentation out. I think tonight, I don't want to talk about law. I want to summarize, and firstly, I want to say to all of you here, thank you. This has been the fourth event that myself and my Chief Whip have been at today, speaking engagement today. And it's the one we've been looking the most forward to because it's the one that we are both passionate about. So, you know, if we look to that and we say, live kinder, live more gently, if you want to summarize it in Aristotelian philosophy, you could say, be good. A lot of good people acting in concert do good things. We've started here today. We've been at this for a long time. A lot of the people in this room we've been working with for 15 years, from the first Global March for Lions and all the way through. And now the Great African Sea Forest, yes, that is lining up. Graham, I'm working with Craig Foster on that. And Premier, Wendy's involved, Jordan's involved. And we're going to try our damnedest to make it happen, not as a political point scoring, but because it's the right thing to do. So let me start by saying I also spoke, I don't know if any of you know Mohanji, Brahmarishi Mohanji. He's an international spiritual teacher. He's been on CNN, he's got ashrams all over the world, and I was speaking to him this evening. And when I sent him the program for this evening, he was overjoyed, almost to the point of tears, and said to me, Anthony, this is, you know, this is what I do and what I love, and please send all my love and well wishes to everybody here at this event. So I would like to send those on his behalf to you all. So as we draw to a close, the discussions we've had today not only challenge us, but also call upon our deepest sense of empathy and responsibility. Today, we are taking some of the first tentative and recurring steps towards animal sentience in South Africa. It's a monumental shift, how we view and treat the non-human inhabitants of our world. And this is our challenge that we have to. And it's a big challenge, and Honourable Bryant in the environmental portfolio will know that environment sits at the very bottom of the pile of government portfolios, and we have the biggest challenge to try and get anything through there. So it's not just a matter of policy, but also a profound moral imperative that we recognize and incorporate animal sentience into our laws. Around the world, we've witnessed this in India. I think New Zealand has got rights, rivers. And these examples are not just symbolic. They are practical acknowledgements that our planet is a shared home with beings who experience life in ways that deserve our respect and our attention and protection. You mentioned UCT. Yes, I was privileged to study under Professor Jan Glasewski. And Prof. Glasewski, just before he retired, when we went into his first year class, or Masters in Marine and Environmental Law, came out with a book by Rachel Carson, The Silent Spring. That was a 1961 publication, I think. And a lot of poignant things in Silent Spring. And if you haven't read it, please do yourselves a favor and get a copy and read it. And she showed us that Silent Spring, that a silent spring, devoid of birdsong, due then to pesticide use, glyphosate, was not just an environmental issue, but a profound loss of the music of life. Her work is a call to recognize the ripple effects of our actions on all beings and the environment. The second book that Professor Glasewski came out with was Father Thomas Berry. And his wisdom further illuminates our path, where he said, "The universe is a communion of subjects and not a collection of objects." This profound statement invites us to see animals not as mere resources or property, but as fellow subjects in the journey of life, with their own worth and their own rights. So why then is it necessary to weave the recognition of animal sentience into our laws? Because laws are not just rules. They are the embodiment of our values, our ethics, our vision, and our vision for the future and for the future generations, those that come after us. By recognizing animal sentience in our legislation, we reaffirm that compassion, empathy, and respect extend beyond the boundaries of our own species. Incorporating animal sentience into our laws is not just an act or a legal reform. It's an act of moral courage. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we have treated other beings and to commit ourselves to a path of greater empathy and justice. So this is not merely an abstract or sentimental goal. It is a necessary evolution of our legal and moral framework to reflect a deeper understanding of the world and our place in it. It challenges us to think not only of what we can take from the world, but also what we owe to it and to its inhabitants. So in closing, let us remember that laws change as our understanding of the world deepens. Today we are called not just to recognize animal sentience, but to act upon it, to ensure that our laws reflect the growing understanding of the complex and sentient lives with which we share this earth. So in conclusion, let us be bold in embracing this responsibility, for in doing so, we affirm the best of what it means to be a human being. I thank you.
I will tell you something quite honestly right now. So the last time I was in this building, I had the great pleasure of interviewing Graça Machel, Kofi Annan, and Sir Richard Branson together as one panel. You can imagine punching above your weight class. And looking around at the pictures on the walls around me, I understood that I probably had more power than any of them in this room, because I am so emotionally connected to this place. I cannot remember one thing that any one of them said to me on that day. I will remember what has been said tonight. Okay, granted, I'll have to go back through a few notes. I will remember and act on what I've heard tonight for the rest of my life. I've felt a paradigm shift within myself, and I've done probably about 50,000 interviews in my career with incredible human beings. not very often do you get all of them represented in one room. So thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking the words that you have tonight, and most importantly, for doing what you do every day, very often unsupported, unfunded, unrequited, unvalidated, but you do it. So thank you. Now, I'm hoping you've got a little bit left in the gas tank, just so we can round things off tonight, because I have a host of questions that I'll wait until I can get each one of these role players back into TV land with me. But I'd like to open the floor to you to ask a couple of our key figures any questions that you might have about that next step or any of the more nuanced spaces as it applies to what you're doing. So I'm going to ask that Michelle, Nicola, Tony, and Fiona, please join us on our chairs up here. And if any of you have any questions, please put your hand up, and I would love to facilitate that. And thank you so much for staying as engaged as you have after a very long day. So if you will, please introduce yourself and fire away.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'm Yondela. My mom's the vet. Yeah, I'm basically learning a lot sitting at home for various reasons. But I wanted to ask, so regarding food, I have a few questions if that's not a problem. Okay, thank you. So regarding food security, I know there's a number of countries that have the privilege of organic farming, especially regarding animals. And I know that not all land that animals can graze on is necessarily arable. But I want to ask about countries with high populations, especially countries such as China. One can even argue India. I'm not 100% sure, but I've been looking more into China from my background, which is an international relations background. And yeah, so I wanted to know about countries such as China, which don't necessarily have the privilege of farming organically, because inevitably, if they farm organically, they'll need to source meat from other countries, which will affect food supply, in other countries, etc. So that's what I wanted to ask. And also regarding people that depend on these industries for a living, what would happen to them? And then my second question regards rural areas and what happens to, so from the rural area that I go to once a year, there's people that tie up their dogs, that put their dogs on a leash for various reasons. Some would argue because they really prove a threat to the people in the community, and also because they tend to do things like, for example, eat chickens, eat chicken eggs, etc. So what can we do regarding that? Do we maybe instill this in education in schools from a young age so that the children at least know? Because I know coming from an adult perspective, adults tend to have a more stubborn worldview. And yeah, and another question that's slightly lighter. How many domestic animals can one have in a household legally? And how many predators truly exist? Yeah, sorry, there's a lot of questions. How many? This is the last one. Okay, yeah.
Well, someone's got more than their 10% or 5% left in the tank. We're ready for a round two. So within that broader conversation, I don't know who would like to put their hand up and answer, at least addressing first the first question that was raised. Feel free. We've got a microphone there.
I'll have a go.
There we go.
So it's actually a myth that intensive animal production produces high volumes of food at low cost. What it does is it externalizes the cost out of the food pricing. So by keeping large numbers of animals in confinement and feeding them grain, what you have to do is clear lands elsewhere in order to provide that food chain. So there's a lot of research that's come out now, even from conservative organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, that say we have to transition away from intensive animal production as the cornerstone of our diet, because there are 10 major externalities from that. One of them is actually a reduction in food security, because what we're essentially doing is taking calories and the constituent elements of proteins out of nature as plants and feeding them to animals, and then extracting only a very small fraction of that from animals and feeding it to people. The other thing is that by keeping animals in these intensive confinement facilities, we actually create a lot of harm to rural livelihoods where people have more subsistence and more natural types of food production. So factory farming that produces, for example, low-cost chicken is in fact a direct contributor towards the destruction of rural livelihoods and the sustainable food chains there. So accepting that people do eat quite large volumes of meat, the United Nations has said it will be impossible for us to sustain that level of consumption through to 2050, where the volume of meat that's currently consumed now will double. So regardless of how we farm these animals, we have to start transitioning from intensive confinement systems to more plant-based eating. And that is now a widely regarded position in both the Food and Agricultural Organization, the climate change movement, and the environmental movement, because the production of animals in this way is also harmful to biodiversity, and as we heard from Fiona, poses massive human risks in terms of zoonotic disease and antimicrobial resistance. In fact, what we should be doing in South Africa is driving our land reform program through providing alternative types of agricultural production to emerging farmers. It's practically impossible for a small emerging farmer to compete with these large vertically integrated corporate food chains that essentially push the costs of their production system off onto the public as a whole through environmental degradation or these other risks that we've spoken about. So I do encourage you to read up on this. It's a growing concern, and governments around the world have been really slow to respond to this, because animal production is linked to all sorts of cultural norms. But from a food security and a human health point of view, it's now beyond any reasonable doubt that we need an urgent transition to plant-based diets, we need more local economies for food production, and we need to find more sustainable ways of producing the proteins that we now consume from animals. To your other question about how many animals you can keep on a property, in Cape Town, there is the animals bylaw, and that specifies how many animals you can keep as pets, and essentially it scales with the size of your property. So if you want to read up a bit more about that, have a look on the city's website for the animals bylaw, but it varies between 2 and 6 animals depending on the size of your land, and that's essentially, again, for human health and nuisance considerations.
It's almost like you've answered that question before. Almost. It's close. Listen, the price of fuel of getting the grain to the animals to eat might quell this whole conversation before we even get to that point. And this might sound strange coming from the tip of the consumer spear. And basically, I'm the first salesman to wake up and sell it every day. We have created economy around selling empty calories so that we can have money and jobs. That doesn't speak to health. In fact, we sell our healthy food by what's not in it, not by the nutrients that's actually in it. Just to follow up, and I'm sorry, I'm summarizing that final question. When we talk about, I don't even want to call it culture, because it's not the culture of the communities that have to become the custodians of the animals that they look after. It's not culture, it's a societal norm. How do we shift that baseline? And maybe, Fiona, you want to speak to that when we talk about adjusting how a young child in a community sees what that dog represents. What is the hit point there for you?
I think for me, and this is something that, something that we've been really advocating for is education. Leading by example, showing communities, showing people, showing children how animals should be treated, and teaching them the compassion and the empathy that we need to teach them. There are so many terrible things going on in society, and if we allow that to continue to expound to animals, we're going to be lost. So education and the accessibility, I think, to the services that I spoke about earlier on in terms of vaccination, sterilization, bringing that to people and educating alongside that and making communities and people part of the solution, I think is really important as well. People becoming involved, volunteering. We've done beautiful programs before where you don't just come and provide services and leave, but you actually create the sustainability within a community so that people can go on with caring for themselves and caring for the animals in their environment after the NGO has actually moved out?
Well, they take over from the NGOs. And the bottom line here is I've learned this as a parent. You don't teach a child anything. You show them. You show them by how you live. And the reason why we see the shifts in the community, such dramatic shifts, kids who were kicking dogs and abusing dogs to running little gangs to force people to go and get their dogs sterilized. And I've seen this transformation in years. That is on the back of them seeing organizations and human beings acting out that purpose for 20 years. That's how you get that shift. Any more questions from our audience?
I'm Graham Howe, and I'm here with Beauty Without Cruelty tonight. Can you hear me? Yes, yes. Okay, a little bit closer. I wondered if controversial new government policies or proposals to monetize wildlife in terms of increasing game consumption, what response the panelists have and what sort of campaigns are being formulated to counter these new proposals that have, I think, been around only for the last few weeks or so. Thank you.
Okay.
Just got to hold it nice and close. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, we're a bit baffled by this, and I think it shows a disjuncture, actually, between new policy and the hole that the wildlife industry still has in government. Because what the proposals are really doing is they're trying to use the language of co-opting communities, but it's not going to do that. It's going to increase the existing wildlife industry and the way that it operates. So we've opposed both the game meat strategy and the new biodiversity economy strategy. That's sort of, one side of, two sides of the same coin. And it's very alarming, actually, because we should be doing the opposite. And so we get mixed messages from the Department of Environmental Affairs. It's very worrying to us that the department speaks one language and the minister speaks another. If it just depends on one minister, I think we are in deep trouble in terms of policy, because if Minister Creasy goes, we're going to be back to where we were before she arrived. And I think that's what her department is driving. And I think that's what the ANC is also driving, because you've got to look at it in the context of regional politics and SADC protocols. It's very much a commodification of wildlife. And we are supposed to be conservation leaders on the planet. But what we're doing is we're actually taking our conservation model and sending it to other African countries, and it's actually a disgraceful model. It's all about commercialization. It's all about canned lions, and that's what we are exporting. So we are very worried about the wildlife trade in live animals, that we are sending to all sorts of countries that have no animal welfare legislation, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. It doesn't look good, I think that we need new politics when it comes to wild animals.
Yeah. Just the system stays the same, just introducing a new commodity within that. That was a fantastic question. Any more questions that you would like to lead? There we go. Once again, just please introduce yourself and then fire away.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Heidi. I'm from Zananda Animal Clinic in Kailicha. My question is a bit of a reverse kind of question. I know we all have animal welfare at sort of at the forefront of our intentions and what we do. And I've often noticed that with government or with organizations that are trying to address animal welfare and educate within the communities and get people to change their mindsets, we go forth with our sort of own idea or concept of this animal welfare. And I want to know, in reverse, what do we do, or do we have any form of structure or individuals that go into the communities that we try to work with and actually establish what their understanding is of, and the relevance or the importance or the concept of what these animals or the environment means to them before we try to address it from our point of view?
Brilliant, brilliant question. I don't know who wants to pick up on that.
Yes, we wouldn't get very far if we parachuted in with our own ideas. It is essential, and that is certainly something that we have always been doing within our communities in the Valley of Grace that comprises Greyton and Hanardendal and other villages, is every single policy we have every program we have adopted has been at the request of the community. So it was local community leaders who came to us and said, these pigs running around are destroying our gardens, they're brutalizing our children. What can we do about them? We don't want them here anymore. And then we asked them, well, what are the solutions? What would you advise us to do? And they were saying how Hanardendal, not very long ago, 40 years ago, supplied vegetables to Cape Town. And they said, we want those days back. We want those days when trucks laden with vegetables grown in this fertile valley could go off to Cape Town with all the surplus after we've taken our share. And the other thing that came out of it was education of children being so important, and how large class sizes of 40, 50 kids was making teachers exhausted. They were doing the chalk and talk, standing at the board, just talking all day and finishing up exhausted through having to manage inattentive, unruly kids because the kids are bored. So when we started with our humane education program, we spoke to a group of teachers who came to inform us and educate us every Saturday, every second Saturday for 6 months, while we worked out and explored together all the options available worldwide, which is how we landed upon the solutionary framework as promulgated by the Institute for Humane Education in the United States as the best way forward. It was from the teachers, not from us. And I believe that we go forward with programs in the communities that are the community's solution to the problems they have identified.
Thank you very much for that answer, and it's amazing because that is echoed. I do a lot of energy discussions and host very high-level forums in that space, and that's exactly where the key is. Indigenous, localized knowledge. That is the key, not just for welfare, not for conservation, but for all social development in that arc. Any more questions coming? There we go. Mr. Singh.
Thank you very much, Graham. Not a question, but just a general comment, because some of the speakers have talked about the human conflict with animals. And I think this is a very big problem. When I was MEC in KwaZulu-Natal, I found that increasingly near our game parks, because the communities that lived along the game park said, well, how do we benefit? We see these Land Rovers and Mercedes and all this getting into these game parks. They're making money. We get nothing out of it. So we started a community participation project where we used to auction, whether it's rhinos or any other wildlife, and the money went to the communities. But in many instances, the community, the Amakosi, said, no, we don't want the money. We want to invest as a community trust into this. So we've got to bring communities into having equity in our game parks, where the bed and breakfast establishments and things are like that. And I think our biggest challenge is, and Tony was talking to me about this earlier on, about elephants. that are destroying crops. You get tigers. You get it all over the world. You know, they destroy the crops. They do all sorts of things. And the human beings see this wildlife as threats. So I think with all your organizations, is there something you can do to educate, and empower? My little granddaughter, who is 8 or 9 now, I was at her house a few weeks ago, and I took a plastic something and I threw it in the bin. She says, no, not there. I said, what do you mean? She says, no, you must put it in the other bin. I said, there's no difference. A bin is a bin. She says, no, that's for plastic, that's for cardboard, and that's for something else. So if we have this kind of education from school level, even in our rural schools, I think it's going to help us as we move forward. So just your comments as NGOs on that. Thank you.
Yes, I think we all basically agree with that. Anthony and Michelle spoke very eloquently about a community of beings and harmonious coexistence, right? So the South African government, whoever it is, has a socio-economic challenge on their hands about how to bring all the people living in near poverty or poverty into the economic system and let them have dignified work. And the natural environment is a key component of that, because if we don't manage it right, people are going to engage with activities like poaching, and we see a lot of that. We should also remember that a large proportion of South African population was excluded from these revenue streams under apartheid, and as you said, live on the outskirts of these reserves and don't see any benefits. But the question is, how do we optimize those benefits? And the South African government, and at the behest largely of industries like the hunting and wildlife trade industry, has taken a specific view on what sustainable use means. It's really a form of unsustainable misuse. It's premised on things like trophy hunting of threatened and protected species, and the trade of animals and animal parts to zoos and for consumption overseas. Whereas South Africa has this robust and potentially growing tourism market, which is more and more conditional on ethical tourism. We cannot compete as a tourist destination if we have dirty secrets in our backyard, like captive lion breeding and canned hunting and illicit trade in rhino horns. What we have to do is expand on the ethical aspects of sustainable use, wildlife tourism and the like. We spoke about the great marine kelp forest. You know, we have all of these natural resources, and if you premise your economy on this extractive use model, you are not only teaching the communities around you that this type of behavior is okay, that it's a good idea to shoot some of the last large tusk elephants because we're going to generate income from that. That's like bombing people into peace. It just makes no sense, right? We've got such a vibrant, sustainable, genuinely sustainable use opportunity in this country, which has much less harmful impact on the environment. But we defer that in the favor of these interests that benefit only a few and are harmful to the environment. And as we've heard from the other people talking, what message do we send to communities and our children if that's the way we structure our economy? We say these animals are property and they must be sold to the largest bidder, the highest bidder. That's totally inconsistent with an ethos of conservation and respect for wildlife and so on. So I think the game meat strategy that we heard about earlier, the national biodiversity economy strategy, those things are all sitting far too much across on the sustainable use, extractive use model. And we really need to pivot to what are our natural strengths, which is a much more sustainable model of ecology, which is based on respect for the nature and mutual coexistence, not an extraction from animals who we view as property.
Can I add my 2 cents? I recently did a campaign launch for Booking.com, going deep. They spent 3 trillion, I'm assuming rand and not dollars, in the build-up to this momentous moment on driving purpose-driven travel through Facebook, through connecting with people that embodied the purpose of travel. Why are you going there? What do you want to achieve? When people want to spend their money, they need a reason why, which is why we've thrown LSM brackets out the window in my commercial space now. There might be a woman who is buying more pasta than a high-end LSM bracket every single day because she's feeding every person on her street. She doesn't want an Afro-Italian fusion of cuisine. She needs to feed people. Yet the hundreds of millions that will be spent on selling that pasta to someone who might or might not make a change in the way that they buy. We are missing the point. Once we connect to the purpose behind the why of it, it becomes easy to link the funding pool, the money, the brands, the big organizations to these entities that South Africa absolutely embodies. Why would you travel anywhere else when you could come to a place like South Africa that offers all of this, all wrapped up in one basket? Yet that being said, I was taken on the best game drive I've ever been on by a gentleman 24 years old. His name was Tabiso. By the age of 21, he had never seen a lion or an elephant. He lived less than a kilometer away from the Pilanesberg. 3.5 years later, given part ownership of that tour company and an investment in that lodge, honestly the best servant. I've been on a lot of filmed educational tours in that space, without a doubt the best game drive I have ever been on. And who is he primed for? International tourists that are worth their weight in dollars and pounds when they come here. The commercial opportunities are far more compelling on that side of the conversation, far, far more. Any more questions before we wrap this up? And it's going to have to be a humdinger, I think, to round off what we've heard. I think maybe it's an opportunity for us to take a deep breath. I would love to ask this panel what that next step is, but we are a few steps already into this journey. The feet are moving really fast. I would say the only step now is connecting with each other. If you need the lawyer to make it happen, if you need the person to tell the story, if you need the connection to community, if you need the trust that is going to be vital for carrying this out, the NGOs, the organizations who have left blood, sweat, and tears in the communities and within this ecosystem that we represent, they represent that trust. They represent a purpose-driven generation of young South Africans. I've felt that baseline shift. People are ready to pick up what you are putting down. Don't lose hope. Stay positive. And thank you, thank you, thank you for just being here tonight. I have a feeling all of us are going to have penny drop moments as we drive home tonight, maybe shed a tear or two with the amount of effort that's gone into this. I will add, for my part, so my wife, who is from England, her permanent residency has just come through, and she committed to becoming a vegetarian yesterday after watching Clarkson's Farm, believe it or not, on a streaming service. So I've imported one vegetarian to play my part. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so, so much. Get home safe, but spend a little bit of time connecting with the people around you. You've earned a drink. You can wet that palate, and of course the canapes will probably keep flowing. Most importantly, just keep doing what you're doing every day. It's not just a good thing, and we can all live good. It's not just being kinder. It is vital for our survival now. It is apparent to me that this line in the sand has been drawn, and we owe so much to you, so keep doing that. To all of you, thank you for speaking so beautifully this evening. What an absolute pleasure to be a part of this tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you.